The river moved slowly, like it was thinking before each breath. Cold water slid past dark stones, carrying thin sheets of ice that whispered when they touched. Snow rested on the banks in soft, uneven layers, untouched by feet or fire. The sky was pale and wide, heavy with silence. This was a land that did not rush. It watched. It remembered. Far to the east, stories had already begun to travel. They moved faster than armies. They spoke of riders who came like a storm, of cities that burned until the ground itself turned black. These warriors had destroyed entire empires, not with anger, but with patience and force. Walls meant nothing to them. Kings fell. Crowns broke. The world learned to fear the sound of hooves before it heard them. In the north, the fear arrived slowly. It drifted into villages with traders and tired messengers. People listened while mending nets or sharpening tools. They nodded, but they did not run. This land had its own hardships. Winter was long. Hunger was familiar. Fear had to stand in line. The Vikings lived close to the water. They built with wood and iron, with hands shaped by cold work and colder nights. Their longhouses held warmth, smoke, and shared breath. Children slept beside elders. Stories were told in low voices, not to impress, but to endure. These people had survived storms and wars and loss. Still, the rumors unsettled them. If the stories were true, the enemy did not fight like others. They did not challenge. They arrived. They surrounded. They waited. Then they erased. Entire empires had vanished under their passing, leaving only quiet fields and broken stones. Against such power, courage felt small. The river remained calm. Ice cracked softly in the distance. A lookout stood near the trees, wrapped in fur, eyes scanning the white horizon. There was no sign of movement, yet the air felt tight, like a held breath. Something was coming. The land knew it before the people did. Inside the longhouses, tools were checked again and again. Not from panic, but from habit. A shield repaired today might save a life tomorrow. A blade sharpened slowly could mean a quicker end. No one spoke loudly. Even the children sensed the weight of the moment and played in quiet corners. This was not a story of sudden flames or screaming skies. It was a story of waiting. Of listening to the river and the wind. Of remembering who you were when the world tried to forget you. Beyond the frozen fields, far from the patient water, an army moved. They did not sing. They did not shout. They moved with the steady rhythm of those who had never been stopped. Snow flattened under their passing. Fires were small and brief. They were not here to stay. They were here to pass through, as they always had. But the river waited. And the people beside it waited too. Neither knew that history was slowing its step, preparing to turn. Morning came without color. The sky was a flat gray, pressing low over the land. Frost covered every surface, turning the world brittle and sharp. Breath rose in small clouds, then vanished. The river still moved, but more carefully now, as if it sensed the tension. The Vikings gathered quietly. There was no grand speech, no loud promise of victory. They stood together, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, hands resting on shields and spears. Their faces were calm, but their eyes were awake. They knew the stories. They knew what had happened to those who stood in the path of the Eastern Army. The relatable problem was simple and heavy. Run, and lose everything without a fight. Stand, and possibly lose everything anyway. Homes could be rebuilt. Lives could not. Each person felt this choice settle inside them, pressing against memories of family, of land, of graves that lay beneath the snow. Scouts returned with quiet urgency. The enemy was near. Not charging. Not rushing. Just coming. A dark line against the pale world, moving like a shadow that did not belong to the sun. Horses breathed steam. Banners barely moved in the still air. Fear tried to take shape, but it found no easy place to stand. The river narrowed the land. Forests closed in on both sides. This was home ground. Every bend, every hidden patch of ice, every shallow crossing was known. The enemy had destroyed empires built on stone and gold. Here, there was only wood, water, and will. As the first figures appeared near the riverbank, time seemed to stretch. Sounds became clear. The creak of leather. The soft clink of metal. The slow exhale of horses. No one rushed forward. No one shouted. The calm was almost unsettling. Then movement. Not a charge, but a test. The eastern warriors approached the frozen edges, testing the ground, reading the land as they always did. They were careful. They were never careless. This was how they had won before. The Vikings did not answer at once. They waited. Snow shifted under boots. A raven cried somewhere in the trees, then fell silent. The river cracked loudly, a sharp sound that cut through the stillness. Heads turned. For a moment, everyone looked at the water. That moment mattered. When the clash finally came, it was not sudden. It rolled forward like a tide meeting resistance. Shields met arrows. Spears met movement. The sound was dull, heavy, and close. Breath became ragged. The cold no longer mattered. The enemy pushed as they always had, expecting the line to break. It did not. The river limited their movement. The ice betrayed their weight. Horses slipped. Orders were given, then lost in the noise. This was not destruction. This was resistance. The battle did not roar. It groaned. Wood split. Ice shattered. Men slipped, fell, rose again. Snow turned dark in places, then was covered by fresh white as the wind shifted. Time lost its meaning. There was only the next step, the next breath, the next movement of an arm grown heavy with effort. The Eastern army adapted quickly. They always did. They tried to pull back, to find space, to bring their strength into play. But the land refused to open. Trees pressed close. The river narrowed escape. What had once been a path forward now felt like a trap made of silence and cold. Among the Vikings, something changed. It was not confidence, but recognition. They saw that the enemy could hesitate. That even those who had destroyed entire empires could be slowed. This realization spread quietly, like warmth returning to numb fingers. A gentle twist unfolded in the heart of the struggle. The Eastern warriors were not fleeing, but they were no longer advancing. They regrouped, circled, tested again. Each attempt met the same resistance. The river cracked and shifted, breaking formations. Horses refused certain steps. The land itself seemed to lean toward those who belonged to it. Breath burned in lungs. Arms trembled. Yet the line held. Not because of rage, but because of connection. Each person fought for the one beside them. For the longhouse behind them. For the quiet nights that had shaped their lives. At last, a signal passed through the eastern ranks. Subtle, practiced. Withdrawal. Not defeat, but calculation. They had lost something here that could not be replaced easily. Momentum. Certainty. This land was not worth the cost. The movement back was controlled, careful. They did not run. They never ran. But they left the riverbank, step by measured step, eyes still watchful. Snow fell lightly, as if to soften the memory of what had happened. The Vikings did not chase. They stood, breathing hard, watching until the last dark shape faded into the pale distance. Only then did the tension drain away. Knees weakened. Shields lowered. Some sat in the snow, staring at nothing, letting the cold steady their shaking hands. The river flowed on, carrying small fragments of ice and blood away together. It made no distinction. It simply moved forward, as it always had. Silence returned, but it was different now. It held weight. It held meaning. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet, some thought. Others welcomed the stillness. Fires burned low in the longhouses. Wounds were cleaned. Stories were not told yet. It was too soon to shape the memory into words. Snow continued to fall, covering tracks, smoothing the scars left by battle. The land began to look like itself again. Only those who had stood by the river knew how close everything had come to ending. News traveled slowly, but it traveled. Not of a great victory, not of a fallen empire, but of a moment. A place where the unstoppable had been stopped. Where destruction had met patience and turned aside. The Eastern Army would continue elsewhere. They would destroy more empires. History would remember them for that. But here, by the cold river, something else had been written. The Vikings returned to their lives. Nets were mended. Wood was cut. Children laughed again, cautiously at first, then freely. The fear did not vanish completely. It never does. But it no longer ruled the quiet moments. In the evenings, people sat together and listened to the wind move through the trees. They listened to the river, steady and calm. They understood now that strength was not always loud. That survival did not always look like conquest. The emotionally grounded ending lived in these small acts. In shared meals. In the way hands lingered a moment longer on shoulders. In the knowledge that they had faced the end and found it could be shaped. The world beyond the river would keep changing. Empires would rise and fall. Names would be written, then erased. But this land would remember. Not with monuments, but with silence and snow. The river flowed on, carrying the story forward, slow and patient, just like the people who had stood beside it when history came calling.